Hey everybody, welcome back to the Saltworks podcast. I'm your host, Hallie Dye. We are so excited that you are here with us today. Got an exciting guest, one that, never really know exactly what he's going to say, so it's always a good time. Welcome to the podcast, my husband, Andrew Dye.
I've heard a lot of intros for guests on the podcast, and that was just a really sweet one. So thank you. Good morning, what do you call your fan base? Salt workers? Salt Wookiees?
We don't call them Salt Wookiees. We don't call them anything.
Oh, okay.
Family. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Sure.
Friends. So I'm excited to be here. I haven't been. It's been a while.
I don't think you've been on this season at all.
I haven't.
Have you been on season 2?
I haven't been in this studio. I mean, I have because we
didn't record all of season 2. We started season 2 at the house.
Yeah.
And then we didn't move until mid-season 2.
Yeah, okay.
And this is our season finale for season 2.
It's great. And it's our 13th anniversary tomorrow. So I told
it will be when it airs, it'll be.
So it's our 13th anniversary today. No better gift than giving me an opportunity to get on a microphone for our 13th anniversary gift. So
absolutely. Andrew does not care for public speaking. Not that I just love it, but I've gotten used to it, I guess, to some extent. But yeah. Are you going to stare at your computer the whole time, or are you going to look at me some?
I'm not. I'm
just wondering.
I'm going to look at you.
Just asking for a friend.
Staring into your eyes.
All right.
Yeah. I'm not used to having like any kind of notes or like computer.
But the
stuff.
way you're unable to look away from it. It's odd. It was like you were reading, what do you call your fans?
Excuse me.
Salt Wookiees?
Yeah.
I was
Salt
did
Wookiees?
You type that in? Were you reading it?
Sorry. I'm just kind of reading ahead a little bit.
Okay, don't do that.
I'm here. I'm present.
Don't do that. Be present. Presence. That's our first point. No.
Yeah.
Hey, fun question, because I actually took some questions on social media for marriage.
Okay.
But backstory, we've decided not to do like a Q&A type thing, but to weave some of those questions in, because a lot of the questions had to do with intentionality in marriage. And so today we're going to talk about intentionality and different facets of intentionality as it applies to marriage, but really a lot of what we're going to talk about is going to be as it pertains to faith and even friendship. So
love it.
But fun question was date ideas. So I'm going to spin that question as you can either answer what was your favorite date or what is your favorite date, like in theory.
In theory?
Yeah.
Okay.
It can be like what would be or what was, either way.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so our kids are 8, 6, and 5. And so basically any time that we get a chance for it to be just us two.
Yeah.
So you got to start there. Okay.
I think that's assumed
a date.
In a
that's
date.
A date.
Yeah.
But what
I
I'm
think
saying
you've just
is
given a definition.
What I'm saying is like you can do anything and it's just the best when it's just us two. So I've kind of liked our recent dates of kind of getting out of town a little bit, driving to the big metropolis of Ruston to eat at Bovines. Because you can kind of get out of town and you don't really know anybody, and
that has become one of our favorite dates because I don't know, I think like either we're too tired or we don't have as much childcare to go to a movie, or there aren't movies out, and so the whole dinner and a movie thing sounds great,
right?
But sometimes like we don't have enough time to do that, or like I said, we're too tired.
But also you can't talk in a movie.
You can't talk in a movie, and so sometimes when we just go eat, it's like you're starving before you get your food, so you don't really have like any brain waves going,
right,
to have conversation until post-meal, and then you go home.
Right.
And so we have liked, either getting a coffee or getting a Coke and driving to Ruston, which is like a 40-ish minute drive for us, and eating there, and then you get to talk on the way home, and we really enjoy that.
Yeah, it's the best.
Get the crab cakes.
The crab cakes are amazing. And then Hallie has like
pasta, I think.
It's like a chef's pasta that Hallie gets. I always get a steak, and I love it. Steak's my favorite food. And then I try Hallie's like at the end, and it's like the best thing I've ever had.
You do that everywhere we go.
I mean it there. But it's like this pasta.
We call Andrew. Can I say this?
Here we go. I have no idea what you're going to say. But.
We call Andrew the Bayou Buzzard in our
thank
family
you.
because he comes behind and finishes everybody's meals.
That's right. Like food tastes good on my plate, but like the last bite of Hallie or the kids is like the
I don't know
best.
if you remember this, but I can distinctly remember sitting at our kitchen table in Baton Rouge and me having to be like, when I put my sandwich down, that does not mean I'm done.
That's right.
Because you would like swoop in there.
Yeah.
And I'm like, see, I'm a female
Right.
and we have conversation in between bites.
Well, I grew up with 3 brothers.
Yeah.
Like you got to eat fast.
Yeah.
But now the kids will be like, Dad, I'm getting up for a second. I'm not done. You know. But I'll tell you this, like you leave the best bites on the plate. Like you leave like the edge piece. I'm an edge guy for brownies.
If there's anything suspicious on the meat, I'm leaving
which is
that.
my favorite bit.
I don't understand.
like the edge piece of a chicken sandwich. Like okay, a Chick-fil-A sandwich, you have the fat end, and then it tapers down into like the crispy end every time. Look at it next time you get one.
Okay, yeah.
She leaves like the crispy end of like maybe chicken, maybe.
I don't like the crispy whatnot.
You don't like the crispy whatnot. I love the crispy whatnot. So that's really.
Lindsay's off the camera shaking her head.
Yeah. Like the edge of the mac and cheese of the whatever that's gotten a little more time close to the heat.
Yeah.
That's gonna be the best.
Yeah. I don't know how we got there.
Yeah.
Best date
Best date
is the edge of the mac and cheese.
Hey,
That's what
that's right.
Yeah, for me, the best date, I love to get dressed up. You know that I love fashion, love a good, reason to wear a dress. And so I like that. My idea of the ideal date is like to be in a big city, because I do like big cities. And that's not our everyday life. And we don't know anybody, and so it can be just us two. Because, when you live in a smaller town, like, I love getting to see people, but sometimes when you're on a date and you're like, we haven't had conversation, you're stopping at a table, and I'm, so it's like being in a big city where everything's new, and it's just us and the sea of people, and then, because I'm an introvert, and then, going to a show or something like that.
Yeah.
Or, I don't know.
Okay.
But,
I have to say, I know I was going to let you finish, but you just like okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to let you finish.
Yeah. Thanks, Kanye. Go
Best
ahead.
date that ever. Yeah.
Best date of all time.
Best date of all time. The best date of all time, I think. Did you get it? I forget the gift. You
You're
gave
about
it
to ask
me.
me if I was there?
You were there for sure.
All right.
Because it was just me and you.
Okay.
But we went to Nashville. Was that for an anniversary gift that you gave me, or was that a Christmas gift?
I think it was Christmas.
Okay, so Hallie,
Yeah.
I at the time was a huge fan of Hamilton.
At the time?
I am a huge fan of Hamilton, but I hadn't seen it yet. So, anyway, so for Christmas or whatever, Hallie gave me a gift of going to Nashville, and we saw our good friends Tyler and Morgan there, and we.
You're scratching the table.
I'm
It's gonna
scratching the
pick
table.
up.
I'm
yeah,
sorry.
I love you, but.
But anyway, so that was awesome. We got out of town, got to do the city thing. Hallie got to get dressed up, and just really is an awesome show. Got to see our friends, and ate some good food, drank some good coffee at the Frothy Monkey.
Yep.
There, and also originated in Ruston, where all good restaurants come from.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Pretty sure. So anyway, that was the best. I would say that was probably my favorite date ever. And then we got to. See some people.
I know, yeah. We got to meet Dave Barnes and Annie Downs.
Yeah, I missed my opportunity though, because when I met Dave Barnes, I saw him and I was like, of course, that was like music. We had a lot of Dave Barnes in our wedding 13 years ago.
Yes.
And so, but we were walking out there at Hamilton too.
They came and stood. So we're waiting on our Uber, which is pushed way back because everybody's leaving at the same time through the same doors.
Yeah.
And it's freezing because it's January. We're in dress clothes, so not dressed to stand out in the freezing weather. And then, we're pushed way back in the crowd behind the doors just so we could get out of the way because we know our Uber is 5 minutes away and it's really going to be more 10 minutes in traffic. Right. So anyways, just put it in perspective. We're standing back there.
Yeah, and Hallie the whole time had been like, you'd been
There's a lot of great country stars. There's a lot of great,
but
if I could just see Annie Downs,
yeah,
even from a distance, working on her next book.
That's right.
That'll make my trip.
So we were standing there in the crowd, and
Not to be a stalker, but I already
Yeah.
knew she'd already seen it. So I was like, we're not going to see her.
Yeah, that's right.
I am a stalker.
So Dave Barnes walks up and like I recognize him, huge fan. I was like, "Hey, Dave," like fan, normal fan thing, like love your music. We played some at our wedding. He's like, "Oh, cool, man,"
He was very
No,
nice.
he was super nice.
Yeah.
He was super nice. But then Annie Downs was there with him, and so she comes walking up, and Hallie's like, "Oh my gosh!"
I think I said cancel that Uber.
Yeah, that's exactly what she said. She said, "Cancel that Uber."
Well,
And then we walked home.
It was just very, very. We did walk home after that,
which was great though.
It was worth it.
Yeah.
I forgot about that. Well, it was just very cool for me because this was the beginning of 2020. We had one that was about to be one. I was still nursing and 2 toddlers. And so I never got out. And so it was a season of listening to Annie Downs a lot.
Mm-hmm. I remember that season.
Because that's one of my favorite podcasts. And it makes me feel like I'm sitting at the table. Her podcast is one of the reasons I love podcasting and that I have a podcast. And so listening to that, and then, just feeling, of course you feel like you know her and she's like, I don't know you, but that whole thing. But anyways, just feeling like most of my days at that time were mundane. It was slow. It was laundry. It was dishes. It was fixing another snack. It was wiping faces, changing diapers, whatever. But for a moment, like I got to meet the person that I listened to all the time that made me feel seen, even though like we didn't know each other. And then we went and ate dinner after that, which was like, I think we ate at midnight.
Yeah, we did.
Didn't we eat dinner at midnight?
Yeah.
And it was just cool because it was like, it was just a special moment where it was like life never looks like this, but it was just really sweet. I felt very seen by God during that, I think,
It was awesome.
That was fun. And getting to visit with our friends.
That's right. I did miss my chance though. We were walking back and I was like, we just walked out to Hamilton. He's standing right there. And I should have said, "Pardon me, are you David Barnes, sir?" He'd have got it.
He would have gone with it.
He would have.
Like, how far would y'all have taken it?
Who knows?
Yeah.
30 minutes at least.
Yes.
The Hamilton fans.
It's Hamilton reference.
You gotta know.
Classic. I loved that.
But hey,
missed opportunity. Next time.
That's right. Next time we go to Hamilton. So
we run into Dave Barnes.
Yeah, that was the best date ever. Glad you asked.
Yep. I agree. That was a good one. Okay, so we're going into talking about intentionality, especially when it comes to marriage, but a lot of what we're going to talk about is faith, because you and I both hold the belief that if you're not being intentional about your faith with the Lord,
That's right.
It's going to be nearly impossible for your intentionality together to pay off, I guess, to be authentic. You can still be intentional, but it's not going to be the same. And so, but we're going to talk about different facets. So going into that, to me, the first thing that we have to talk about is intentionality with God. When people say, because I think one of the questions was posed of like, how do you stay intentional in the busiest seasons of life? I can't remember a season that didn't feel busy.
That's right.
Because busyness comes in a lot of different forms. And, whether it's like we have children whose needs are constant, or we have a job that's constant, or whatever that looks like. I mean, is there a season where you don't ever say we're super busy?
That's right.
I don't know. I can't
you
remember.
look back and you're like, what did I do with all my free time?
Yeah.
Before kids. But
absolutely.
You can't,
you filled it with something.
Felt like you're so busy. Yeah, you did. You did.
Yeah. And I think in some ways, the busier you get, the more intentional it can push you to become.
Yeah. Because
you have to.
Yeah. And it's that way with God, and it's that way with your spouse.
Yeah.
For sure.
When you think of intentionality and just to back up, you and I are probably in one of our busiest seasons we've ever been in, because we still have young kids with a lot of needs. There's a lot more independence now than the season we just talked about on that date, but they still have needs, and they have places they need to be. So it's a lot of running the roads. a lot more discipleship with kids, so constant conversation with them, and less from me and you, I think, in those times when we're all together. But also, I'm writing my first book. I'm about to enter into edits. I'll be in edits all summer, and then we'll be marketing and whatever. You are building a business, you and Micah. And it's a brand new thing, and it's a brand new thing in a field where there's famine right now. And so we both have hardships, and we both have busyness and goals set before us. And so intentionality is very needed where we are.
It is. And the thing about intentionality is, by definition, it doesn't just happen.
Yeah.
And so I've been kind of back and forth. I'm bad about starting books and really enjoying it. Not super intentional on finishing them. It's kind of like my thing. I'm doing the thing.
You're doing the thing on the table.
But one of the books that I started reading whenever we had kind of had a little getaway at the beginning of the year is John Mark Comer's book, Practicing the Way. And when you mentioned yesterday about talking through the intentionality thing, I was like, it made me think of one quote out of that, and it goes like this. For those of us who desire to follow Jesus, here's the reality we must face. If we're not being intentionally formed by Jesus himself, then it's highly likely that we're being unintentionally formed by someone or something else. And so when I think about it that way, and his whole book is talking about intentional time with the Lord and it being more, discipleship and following the Lord being more of like an apprenticeship and less than like a one-time experience during the week or whatever that is. But he really talks about taking time that is maybe not even necessarily like your scripture reading, but taking time to intentionally spend with the Lord and seek his will for your life, and that sort of thing. And that's something that I've been trying to do slowly in the mornings. And people, have to find time to do it themselves, what works best for their schedule. But when I think about that, I think about how, it's super busy. It's hard to spend that intentional time with the Lord. And in the same way, it's hard to do that with you. But just blocking out, being intentional and making a plan to block out time is so important. And we could do better at that with me and you for sure.
Yeah, and I hadn't really thought about this, but when you think of things that you're intentional with, it's taking things that in theory you believe you absolutely need and prioritize and making sure they happen. And so like you can be like, I think rest is important, but if you never schedule it, you really don't.
That's right.
Or at least you believe you can go on living without it.
That's right. And you can think that it's super important, but if you don't practice it, like there's discipline involved in intentionality. And
you're not going to reap the benefits of it.
No, you're
just
not.
Just by believing it's good.
You're not.
Yeah. And so I like the quote that you said from that book, and it makes me think of do not be conformed by this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind.
Romans 12 too.
Yeah, and it's like you are either going to be conformed, which is a very passive, like, oh, well, this is just easier and I didn't really make plans otherwise, or you can be transformed, and that requires discipline. It requires planning and intentionality.
That's right.
And it's requires spending time in his word.
That's right.
But I also thought about this, and I had this further down in my notes, but I feel like it applies here. I was listening to a woman talk about this on Instagram, and I wish I could remember her name. I do like to follow her, but she just shares like little thoughts on her stories and stuff. But she was saying that most of the time, we as Christians, when we hear abide in me, to abide in the Lord, and that passage we talk about from John 15, that we think about listening to worship music and, praying, reading your Bible. And she was like, of course we need those things. Those are spiritual disciplines. That's very good. But it's really talking about when you abide in him. Yes, of course we need to know that, to know what he desires and what his heart is. But it's also to do as he did.
That's right.
Do as he does. And so she was like, really, a large part, if not the main part of abiding is obeying.
That's so true.
It's carrying out what you believe. And that, you have to do that. You have to consciously do that.
You do.
Because most of the time you're not going to want to.
You do. That Romans 12:2, when it talks about not being conformed, but being transformed, by the renewing of your mind, talks about, so then you'll know his perfect will. And there's no other way to do that unless you're in scripture and you're in prayer and you're letting him transform you into what he wants you to be. But talking about your actions, I mean, that is being intentional with God too. When you know his will and he convicts you for the sin that you have in your life, well, now he's calling you to live righteously. And we talk about it all the time, or at least I do. But there's in Amos 5, it's talking about how, the Lord is saying these things, but he basically, this is paraphrased, but he basically says, I hate all your shows and pretense, the hypocrisy of your praise, the hypocrisy of your solemn festivals. I hate all your shows, basically, and he doesn't listen to your prayers in those instances and stuff like that. He says he blots out his ears whenever. One version says he even blots out his ears when he hears those praise songs. But he says instead, let there be a flood of justice and an endless procession of righteous living. Yeah. And so intentionality with God, it's twofold. I mean, it's abiding and knowing his will for your life, and conviction, and then it's acting on those things and being intentional in that way. And both of those things take discipline and actually doing what you're called to do.
And it's not to say that we're not promised trials and tribulation here, because we are. Like, Jesus also promised that, but he promised he'd be with us. And in all of those things that we would have regardless, like, that intentionality and time with the Lord is going to make everything sweeter, including your marriage.
Oh, yeah.
Because when you're when you're growing, degree by degree to look more and more like Christ, like, who doesn't want to be around that person, who doesn't want to naturally love that person?
That's right. And it has when you read scripture and you read the gospel, it has this effect of, man, I am a sinner that has been offered this profound grace, and it changes the way you view people, particularly your spouse, who you can get more frustrated with than anybody.
Yeah, it's funny you said that. I want to read these two verses from Psalm 144. This is verse 2 and 3. It says, "He is my steadfast love and my fortress, my stronghold and my deliverer, my shield, and he in whom I take refuge. O Lord, what is man that you regard him, or the son of man that you think of him?" And I love those two verses for what we're talking about. The first verse I love because when we spend time with the Lord and when we seek to be fulfilled in him, to ask him, where it is that you want me to go? Like, what is this that I'm feeling, and all that? And we'll talk more about that in a second. But you're putting him in the position to be your steadfast love, your fortress, your stronghold, your deliverer, your shield. It is he who you take refuge in. You're taking a lot of unnecessary expectations off of your spouse when you're constantly doing that. Not to say that we're not supposed to be partners and we're not supposed to be encouraging and uplifting, but it's to say this is for you to set your eyes on him, as to fulfill all of those things, to be your refuge, so that you're not leaning. And we see that when I'm less intentional about my relationship with the Lord and about those things that I need, and seeking him for those things that he promises to fulfill, like, I am naturally, like, more nitpicky with you, not just because, like, I don't feel fulfilled, but I'm also expecting you to be some of those things.
Yeah, the other side of that coin is whenever I am not viewing him that way, as, meeting all of my needs, then I'll look to you for, encouragement, or, in these hard seasons of life. And it's like, that's not your responsibility. I mean, you're a great encourager, but it's not your responsibility to meet all the needs that the Lord's supposed to meet.
Right. But I love that second verse of, "O Lord, what is man that you regard him, or the son of man that you think of him?" Because, like, that right there is, here's all these things that he is and he fulfills this, but then here's also the humbling thing of, like, man, like, that you even think of me, much less that you're my refuge and my shield and my deliverer and my stronghold. And so there's this, like, beautiful fulfillment and truth of what he is for us. And then there's also, like, hey, balance that with the fact that it's crazy that he even thinks of us. And I think those two together are, like, there's joy. Those two things, it brings gratitude.
That's right.
That you're living out of now.
The insignificance and the significance together.
Yeah. And so, okay, but this verse too, And this goes into what we were saying about like when you seek him and you filter things through him first, it goes well for you in your other relationships. It says, for the word of God is living and active, sharper than any two-edged sword, piercing to the division of soul and of spirit, of joints and of marrow, and discerning the thoughts and intentions of the heart. That's Hebrews 4:12. We quote that a lot, talking about the importance of going to God's word because it is alive and active. It's the only book we have that's alive and active because it is his word. And it talks about it's able to bring discernment. It's able to discern things. What's really interesting, though, yes, the more we know his word, the more we know him. But it also says it's able to discern the thoughts and intentions of the heart. Not only am I learning more about him, but I'm also seeing like, I read that passage this morning. That was convicting. Like I'm having some unrealistic expectations, or there's some selfish ambition here, or, whatever. There's, I'm having some envy, or, that I wasn't seeing, or whatever. And when you read his word, it also teaches you what's in your heart. And that's a big part of intentionality to me, because I'm an external processor. You know this. You're an internal processor. There's upsides to that and downsides to that. And all that means, for people that might not have heard of it, is I tend to talk to get to my point. It helps me to talk or write or whatever that might be to get to what it is that's bothering me or what I'm really trying to say or whatever that is. You take more time to reflect, like going on a walk for you, journaling. Those sorts of things are helpful to you to get to your thoughts. But as an external processor, if I am not externally processing with the Lord and I'm expecting for your time to be where I figure out how I'm feeling, that's not being a good steward of our time together as a couple. Not to say that that's never the case, but like I need to process those things with the Lord first, right. Not only because he's my deliverer, but also because like when I get to the heart of it with the Lord, because he's able to discern my heart in ways that you can't and I can't, now I can bring it to you and we can talk about it.
That's right.
And so, there's a lot there.
Yeah. And I know we're going to talk about grace a little bit later on, but I mean, that's it. I mean, to argue, gracefully, you can't just throw all that stuff on that person that you're dealing with, that you don't even really know what's going on until you handle that with the Lord and see what it really is. Otherwise, you're just getting into these arguments and look, we get into some arguments, but
never. That's not a thing.
Yeah.
No, we do, and it's always.
I feel like we argue well, though. We don't always argue well.
Define argue well.
I feel like we had a lot of wisdom going into our marriage where people were like, okay, you're going to have arguments. Here's how you argue well. Yeah. You don't
never say something you can't take back.
Never say something you can't back. Whoa. You can't take back. Don't use nuclear words that are really harmful to that person. And we have to, we add words to our nuclear list all the time.
Yeah. Because some words like really bother you. And some things really bother me.
Yeah. And I feel like we do a really good job of not using those even whenever we're the angriest we can be at each other. Not using words like always, every time. Yeah. Never. Always and every and never. Yeah. But we do. I mean, there's some couples. I've had conversations with couples that have never had an argument. I'm like, how in the world, But I feel like we have, like, through the grace of God and great wisdom and insight, learned what it looks like to argue well, even though sometimes we don't. Yeah. But I feel like it's an ongoing process. Like we're both learning, how to argue well and how to view that person the way that the Lord views them. Yeah. And going back to, again, spending time in the Word and letting that Word transform your mind. Like that's a great thing about that, is that it allows you to see people the way that the Lord sees them. Right. Or it should. I mean, we don't do it all the time, but
you see yourself more clearly and your faults and your failings and your humility.
Yeah.
And so everything, like when your spouse loves you, like it's a gift. after that because
That's
you
right.
feel fulfilled. But then you also see that person with more grace because you're in a humbler position, you're fulfilled by the Lord, you know,
Exactly.
and you're able by extension to be that branch because he's the vine.
That's right. R.C. Sproul said this. He said, "When I think I'm unfairly hated, I try to remember that I am unfairly loved." And that's exactly...
That was rude, Andrew.
Well, hated's a strong word. Tim Keller says it like this.
No, that was just convicting. It was good.
Tim Keller says it like this: the gospel is this. We are more sinful and flawed in ourselves than we ever dared believe, yet at the same time, we're more loved and accepted in Jesus than we ever hoped dare. And when you can look at your spouse, that person who you're most vulnerable with, who oftentimes you can get the most angry with in situations because your expectations are different. When you view them through that lens and yourself through the lens of, hey, I'm a sinner that has been forgiven so much. It reminds me of that story of the guy who owed the man so much and it was forgiven, and then he went to the other guy who owed a little bit and he wouldn't forgive that guy.
Yeah.
I mean, how can we not forgive and show grace?
Right. Yeah. I think like we're getting into communication, which I think is like a huge part of that intentionality.
Absolutely.
Both in your preparation for communication and in having it. So we've talked a lot about your preparation in that we seek the Lord first. Like,
Yeah.
seek the kingdom first and all these things will be added to you. You know, you that is what comes first in every relationship and every facet of life as believers. And there are all the reasons why and many more that we didn't cover. But also in your preparation for your relationships, you have to do some work on yourself. Like, yes, with the Lord, with journaling, with counseling, with trusted friends.
You're great counsel, but you're not my counselor.
Right. There is such a benefit to having a third party that you can sort things out with, that is licensed to help you sort things out. Because sometimes, your spouse, when they tell you something, it's either like, well, it can go two ways. It can either be like, well, you're biased against me in this area, or you're biased to me in this area. So it's either like, oh, well, you have to say I'm great, if you're biased to someone, or like, well, that's your brokenness and you're biased against that. And so it's just, that can be really helpful. But whatever that looks like for you, to spend some time with self-reflection and prayer with God's word. And we talked about his word discerning the things of our heart. It's being able to realize, what do I need? What am I feeling? What is that? Because we kind of use these words now because we've heard these from a podcast, but people can often fluctuate between suppressing everything they feel, and sometimes that can be patience. That can be moments where we need to do that, maybe seasons, but not forever. And we can suppress, oh, well, just ignore that, push that down, move past it, not really ask any questions. And then we can go from suppression to eruption. Okay, that's it,
Yeah, you're being hurtful right now. So
I didn't say who, I said some people.
Yeah.
But what happens is you're suppressing things that likely have nothing to do with your spouse. They could. It depends. But you're not bringing it up. You're not bringing it up. You're not bringing it up. And then what happens is the other spouse, they might come to you and say, well, hey, when you did this earlier, that really bothered me. Or when you don't do this, that makes me feel this way, or whatever. And then that eruption comes well, this. You've got this list or whatever, or you've had a stressful day at work and you just feel disrespected that was even brought up in the day that you've had, or whatever that looks like. And so there's a couple things that happen there. One, you've not named and navigated what it was that you were feeling prior to that conversation when you respond that way. And the truth is we all respond that way sometimes.
Especially late at night, or if we're hungry.
Well, but some people, this can be their everyday patterns, but you have to be able to name what you're feeling when you feel it and be able to navigate. Okay, that's unreasonable, or actually, no, this is reasonable, and I'm going to bring it up, in a kind way or whatever. So you're able to know what it is, and you're able to figure out where you need to go after that. And that takes practice and intentionality. But also what happens on the flip side of that is you've invalidated now the other person's feelings. Because let's say I've been suppressing, I feel like I'm being super, I feel like I'm being a victim because I've done all this around the house and I'm whatever, and I've kept the kids and you've been gone, or whatever that looks like. I feel like I've been really intentional. I feel like you haven't, and I haven't said anything about it, and I'm operating, keeping my mouth closed, but
Right.
feeling this way, maybe not even realizing. And you come in and you say, hey, like, when you texted me this, or when you said this, like that, that made me feel disrespected, or that made me feel whatever. And I'm like, well, I've done this and I've done that and I've done whatever. It's not playing fair, because like I am invalidating your experience of what you said when like your isolated event was true and fair, and you've spent the time naming what you feel and navigating it. And I've just spent it in silence in that instance. And then be like, I'm keeping record of wrongs.
Right.
And so, there's a lot there.
There is. And I feel like, you're an excellent communicator. And I feel like
Thank you.
external processors probably have it a little bit easier as far as communicating, like their needs, wants, hurts, that sort of thing.
Maybe. Sometimes you can end up saying unwise things because
That's
you're
true.
thinking out loud. It just depends.
But I think probably internal processors like me are more susceptible to just holding it in, and then, like you said, just getting super frustrated.
yeah, because if you're not taking that intentional time privately,
Right.
yeah,
Yeah,
I
it
can
doesn't
see
matter
that.
if you're being quiet. But that is something that I have learned a ton from really just being married to you, is the intentionality of communication. And that's probably every, marriage relationship. But that's something that I still deal with and work on, because I grew up having one emotion basically, and that was just getting mad,
Yeah.
playing sports and just laughing or mad. So this whole communication thing is new to me after 13 years. But no, I really, it's such a crucial part of every marriage, is just being intentional in how you communicate and having a game plan going in. But that is something that I have learned through your ability to name what it is and be open and honest about it, and before it just kind of, and it's hard for me. It really is hard for me to not, like, you never want to be. It's hard because there's a balance of, if somebody wrongs you, you want to be like, well, I'm going to say it right now, because they might not know that they've wronged me, and I don't want them to do it again, or show them grace because this is not their normal character.
Well, and I think you bring up an interesting thing, because we do, like, I feel like one of the things that has been annoying at times in our marriage, but also I think looking back at the scope of the last 13 years helpful, is we over communicate for the most part. Like, we can talk things to death,
That's
like
right.
maybe not
Bring
let things
them
slide.
back up. Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I don't think we do that as much, but like, but at the same time, like, okay, we're going to talk about it every time it happens. And I don't think that's terrible, as long as it's done well. Like, you can offer grace and still bring something up. You can say like, hey, I know you didn't mean this, or like, I know whatever, but like, I just wanted you to know it made me feel this way, because that actually can be a form of suppression, I believe. I am not a counselor. I'm not licensed to say this, but I'm just saying, sometimes our logical side of our brain can be like, well, he didn't mean that. Like, he was busy. He was whatever. And so we don't say anything. We're in our mind showing grace, but it really did bother us, and we don't want to say it because we don't want to throw any more on. And it's like, that's not right either, because you're still keeping a record and you're still suppressing. And there is a healthy way to say, hey, I know you've
That's
had a
right.
crazy week.
Yeah.
Like, I want you to not
This is
see
out.
that.
I know that this is outside of your normal character.
Yes, but I just want you to know, like, I also have had a crazy week too, and like when you didn't pick up your dirty clothes, and you know that makes me feel like whatever that is for you, like, because those things all
Hypothetically dirty clothes.
You know, whatever that might be. But whatever that is that made you feel a certain way, or they forgot to do something, or they didn't answer your call, or whatever that is that means something to you, there's a way to show grace, make allowance for each other's faults, and still bring up what bothered you. And that's naming and navigating, like, you know. And so I think sometimes we can think feelings are hokey and suppress, but I think sometimes we can also be like, well, they know and suppress. And like either way, it's not really entering into this partnership that you should have together. I also want to make a point, because I do want to talk about partnership and marriage, but I want to make a point about validation. When you validate someone's emotions, that does not mean that you're agreeing. Like a lot of times we think, well, I'm only going to validate what I think is valid. And that's not exactly right, because like if I do something to hurt your feelings or make you mad or whatever, and you come and tell me, and it was like totally not at all what I meant, like it's going to go better if I'm able to say like, well, I can see where you would have felt that way and whatever, like that. Yeah, that makes sense. Like when you thought this, I can see that I would feel that way too. You know, I want you to know that this is where I was coming from. And it's not an I'm sorry, but it's like,
I'm sorry. I hear you and I'm sorry.
Yes.
That I'm sorry is one of the biggest parts of intentional communication.
Yes.
It is.
Tell us the art of I'm sorry, Andrew.
Would you like me to get into
You
that?
actually do apologize really well, and I learned that from you.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, but sometimes your apologies get on my nerves.
But I feel like this is one of those things that we've grown so much in over the past decade.
Yes. But also still talked about last week.
Also, we still talk about it, just less frequently. But so when we first got married, and even like last week, I can tend to apologize really quickly. Like, and it's an authentic apology. Like whenever I feel.
Sometimes it's authentic.
Sometimes 99% of the time, most of the time it's authentic. But I can feel like, and I guess the other percentage of the time it's just like, I want to be done with it. But I can tend to see that I'm wrong and apologize right there in the moment. And then Hallie can tend, as an external processor, can feel like that apology was a little bit too quick.
Yeah.
And that I didn't have time to fully recognize what I had done before offering the apology, which I've come to understand a lot better.
Well, and I retract what I said about being authentic, because I don't think, it's not that I think you're being inauthentic necessarily. I mean, there might have been instances where we both apologize and we don't really feel it,
Sorry,
but we're just like
your feet come off the sorry. That's the way you say it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, we had one of ours be so angry that he levitated off the ground, and his I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It was like a fitful I'm
Me
sorry.
and him are very similar in that way. Not in the way we apologize though. But
well, to finish my point, like it's not that it's necessarily feels inauthentic, although I don't know. But it's that, like, okay, you might realize you were wrong, or you shouldn't have said, or whatever.
How wrong?
No, it's not to the extent. It's that, like, I want to feel seen in our marriage. And if you do not let me state what it is that I felt, then I don't feel seen by you, which also makes me feel not pursued or loved.
That's right.
And, like, that's my greatest need in our marriage. So,
and on the other side of that, early on, you would apologize very slowly, you know. And so...
out of pure stubbornness.
But what's crazy is, like, these days, I probably apologize a lot slower than I did, and you apologize a lot quicker than you did. And so there's kind of a balance there. And again, like, that's the grace of the Lord for us to even recognize that in each other, and we've had that intentional communication. But
Yeah.
we talked to some couples. I mean, some people don't ever apologize, and humility is so important as you're intentional with the Lord, and His will is revealed to you, and His grace is revealed to you. The more you realize that you've been shown grace, the more you realize that you need grace. And that humility is a huge part of that, is the outcome of that. And you can't apologize without humility.
Yeah. And you, as long as truth is paired with grace, I don't think you can make grace and our faith too radical.
Yeah. That's right.
Now, if you remove truth, then it's not
Absolutely.
the gospel anymore. But I don't think you can make grace too radical, because there's a lot of big things. Like, I just was reading the verses about, like, why do you believers sue each other in court right before non-believers? Like, why don't you just let yourself be wronged? And the idea there is, like, stop caring so much for your agenda that you put down God's for even a second.
Oh, yeah.
And if God's agenda is for His glory to be shown and for us to be forbearing with each other and making allowance, like, that's inside marriage when nobody can see that too.
That's right. But look at Jesus. I mean, He poured Himself out, humbled Himself, and poured Himself out.
Well, and the best verses I could think of this were simply from Galatians 5, 20 through 24, when it talks about the acts of the flesh are obvious, and it lists all these different ones, but in those it's hostility. I feel like I said that wrong.
Hostility. Pretty sure.
Quarreling, jealousy, outbursts of anger, selfish ambition, dissension, and division are in those. And it's like, yes, there is a time to explain and disagree. Like, this is not saying do not disagree. Like, one thing that we like to say is advocate for your needs and then fight for the other person's. Usually we get those backwards. We're fighting for what we want. And everybody does that. And that's unfortunately natural because it's an act of the flesh. But that quarreling, the jealousy, the outbursts of anger, the selfish ambition, those things are trying to win the argument. It's trying to defend myself. It's not trying to love your spouse the best you can, to glorify the Lord, and to better the marriage.
That's right.
Totally different things. And the way that we know that we are is by the fruit of the Spirit. It's love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control.
That's right.
Against such things there is no law.
That's right. And it's the exact opposite of those words that you used in the first verse that you read. But I mean, it reminds me of Ephesians 4 when it talks about walking in a manner worthy of your calling, with humility and gentleness, with patience, showing tolerance to one another in love. And that's just the exact opposite of quarreling. And it's harder to do.
It is harder to do. That kind of leads us into partnership. I think, like when you're realizing that the two of you are on the same team, and you're fighting for the same thing, which is unity in Christ, there's grace, there's patience, there's kindness, there's forgiveness. And so, your marriage is not just for you to be loved and seen and forgiven. It's also for you to love and see and forgive. Like, you have to see both of those things. But, we want to be clear that, like, we hold a biblical view of marriage, that the husband is the head of the household, and that, wives submit to the husbands as as the church does to Christ, but it's also in submission to each other. And that's a verse that people can skip over, that it's submit one to another, and that it's husbands, love your wife as Christ to the church. And so in that word of submission, there's also partnership. And so do you want to kind of talk about partnership, what that means to you, before we kind of dive into that?
Yeah. So that's something that I feel like the Lord has really, like, allowed us. And I mean, we were married as kids. I mean, you were 20 years old. 20. And I was 22. And so we've grown up together, and we've gone through seasons of, we're both going for dreams and both starting new things. We're in one of those seasons right now.
Yeah.
And then you have kids, and it's even more so a partnership. And so the partnership for me starting out is we were both on this mission together to spread the gospel.
Yeah.
And whatever that looks like. I mean, we do some ministry together. We do some ministry apart from each other, but we always support each other as a team, as a ministry team.
I actually love that you said that, because that was a thought that I forgot to put in my notes, but I have been thinking about that you partner in each other's callings. Like, I mean, our big calling is to be servants of Christ.
Right.
But we partner with each other in our callings, because like how you feel called to do that is going to be different than how I feel called to do that.
That's right.
But I know, like, when I started doing the podcast less as I don't want to say hobby, but less as a side thing and more as the main thing, and got a book deal and started speaking at churches more or whatever, there was a point where I had to say, hey, I can't do this if you don't go with me. Not because you weren't, but because I needed that assurance. Because, like, you know, you might not love to speak on stage, but I need to know that, like, you're just as for me doing that, or I can't go, you know?
Right.
And same thing with you taking jobs, you know, like there have been times where you're like, I don't want to do this. You're not, you know, like if you're not in agreement or whatever.
And I learned that. I mean, my dad was that way.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a pastor of a church, and he's always been like, look, if Amy doesn't want me to do it anymore, I'm done. Like, that's it. Like, we'll do something completely different. So their partnership and work for the Lord is number one, separate from whatever their job is, even if it's ministry. But they have always been together, but that's always been their first and foremost ministry, was their partnership together. And so I had really good models from my mom and dad in that. But, you know, as far as day-to-day partnership, I mean, do you want to talk a little about day-to-day partnership?
Yeah, I was going to say, like, there's the partnership of, like, the getting into the roles of marriage. And I feel like we've talked about that before on the podcast, with the episode you were on in season 1, with the episode of Blake Shelby. Like, those are some great ones to go back and listen to if that's, like, something that someone had questions about. Obviously, great studies out there, too. And Ephesians 5 is wonderful, but I think, like, for us, the partnership comes up mostly in the day-to-day things. And this is kind of an interesting conversation, but one of the biggest ways that comes about in our generation is mutual chores, you know? And, like, Andrew and I have been talking about this. Like, I want to dive into this rabbit hole for just a minute. So I think that it's funny, like, if you talk, if we had some friends recently that, like, they were blown away that the husband, like, the grandparents were blown away that the husband was cooking dinner, because they were like, what? He is cooking? You know, because they did not grow up that way. Most households. Some of them did. And so I want us to take our grandparents or older generation for just a minute, because it's far enough removed, you know, to be like a stark difference, but also close enough that we can remember it. But, you know, our grandparents' generation, there was a lot more emphasis on the house being kept, on, you know,
for the woman,
you being dressed, for the woman, the kids being, you know, disciplined and, you know, not unkempt or whatever. And the husband worked and came home. Most households, not everyone. And, like, there's this expectation, I think, for our generation to kind of keep some of those same things. And so when we don't, or when it looks differently, it can be like, oh, that is so nice. And it is. It's a wonderful blessing. Or it can be like, we never had that, or this generation is soft, or has unrealistic expectations, or whatever. But the truth is, there are way more women working because they have to. Like, I mean, even just in the last year or so, the inflation, like, household income, as opposed to, like, what things cost, the cost of living, homes, whatever that looks like. I forget what the rates are of, like, you know, I think, like, in whatever year, like the house was 2 years of your average income or whatever. And now it's like, I forget, it's something crazy, like, and so already there's like, life can't look like that for most people. But even for our experience, because I've been a stay-at-home mom for most of our marriage, as a mom now, the expectation, and not just culturally, but what we know, like I am no longer just being a nurturer and a caretaker. I am also being a guard at the door, because we are aware of so much more darkness.
Not only are we aware, there is more.
There is more. We have to have parental controls here. We can't,
commercials, like everything is.
Yes, like commercials, phones, how much screen time. The days of y'all go outside and be back by dinner, that would be considered neglect in these days. And so there's a lot we could talk about in that, but I just present that to say it isn't that that women just always want equality, or they don't understand, or they don't want to do their job. It's that their jobs actually changed because they are working more, and even if they're staying home, there's a lot more emphasis on child rearing. I think that in previous generations as a whole, and protection and constant supervision that other generations didn't either need or know that they needed. And so the chores are something that do have to be mutual.
That's right.
Because like, you don't have time to do certain things whenever you've got to keep 3 kids supervised and protected all day long.
That's right.
So
what's funny is there was a guy that was our grandparents' age that was in the church, and he's a great guy, the best guy, but he would secretly do the dishes every night. Because he loved it, and he was serving his wife, and he was, he was a godly man. And he would do the dishes, and he told her, he told his wife, he said, if you ever tell anybody that I did the dishes, I'll never do them again. Which is funny. And I do the dishes. I mean, I'm a Tetris guy, and so dishes, like, it's kind of a
I don't mind unloading,
problem to solve,
and you don't mind loading, so
that's
that
right.
Works out for us.
But we were talking about this. I was kind of thinking through this, and I was like, back in the day, our grandparents back in our grandparents' day, they would view the housework as the woman's work. And so, but you have to think, okay, well, what would be considered men's work? Being industrious, going to work, providing for the family, and that sort of thing. But we talked about this morning. When you look at the Proverbs 31 woman, she's industrious, and she's providing for the family, and she's doing all these things. Yeah. And so
it's actually not the most biblical view.
If you ask our grandparents, hey, do you think that's in the Bible? They'd probably be like, yes, it is somewhere. You know, in Leviticus. Yeah. But
not necessarily our grandparents, but just
not
age.
Not our grandparents, no. But just that age, you might, that was definitely a worldview. Yeah. But it's just different.
Absolutely.
And then, the father is, we were designed to be a provider and to provide financially and to provide security and safety and that sort of thing. But we're also to provide emotionally for our family and spiritually for our family. Yeah. And so
when you think about how Christ loved the church, how did Christ love the church? Yeah. Did he just come and die? Did he come and serve and wash feet and cook dinner? He cooked breakfast for Peter.
And ultimately gave himself up.
Yes.
And so when you view it through that lens and view your spouse through that lens, there's a lot more to provide. And there's a lot more overlap of, hey, we're in this partnership together, providing financially, security, emotionally, taking care of the kids together. And it's how it should be.
It is. And I had the thought to kind of the WWJD, what would Jesus do, thought, because I'm a product of the 90s, and also it's true. But when you think about how Christ loved the church, think about Jesus's time here with his friends. The idea of us abiding in him and us remaining in him as a branch to the vine, yes, to draw from him, but also to branch out and do the work as an extension of him. And so it's inside our households, out in the world, whatever that looks like. If Jesus was living here and he was staying in your household, what do you think he would do there in his time? Do you think he'd be like, I'm not doing the dishes?
Yeah.
It's somebody else's job. No, that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous to even say that out loud, and yet there are so many people who go through life, men and women,
Yeah.
who think that's beneath me. That's not my job. If you're a believer, the thing you see in front of you is your job.
That's right. See a weed, pull it.
Yeah.
And I had great role models of that, and my mom and dad too. They were both
Yeah.
shared. Of course, they had 4 boys. So
Yeah.
what do you do?
Yeah.
But I did WWJD bracelets.
Yeah.
There was a time in my life when I had remember you would stack them? Did y'all stack them around
No.
here? That was just a
I
Texas
wasn't
thing.
a stacker. I don't.
I have
I don't know.
10 on each arm, man.
Yeah.
All different colors. Representing.
Absolutely. Well, the last thing, Andrew, I have just quickly is accountability. I think there are seasons for accountability that is with it can be with sin or whatever. And there are different marriages that fight different battles. It could be addiction, could be lust, it could be whatever. But there's accountability that's not also just sin. It's hey, are you walking in surrender? Are you walking in truth? And so how that might look for us right now in our season, what we are keeping each other accountable of constantly is are you carrying the weight of that? Or are you believing that the Lord holds all of that? Because we are both starting new things.
Right. And what's crazy is that goes back and forth.
Yes.
You could be the one day saying, "Are you giving that up to the Lord?"
Yeah.
And then that role reverses the next day, and it's "Hey,
yeah,
you just told me this. Are you doing that?"
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And so, This says, take care, brothers, lest there be in any of you an evil, unbelieving heart, leading you to fall away from the living God. But exhort one another every day, as long as it is called today, that none of you may be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. And that deceitfulness of sin can be something stark, or it can just be an unbelieving heart of I've got to take this into my own hands. All this relies on me.
Absolutely.
I don't trust that the Lord's going to provide. And so, your heart can become hardened for a lot of different reasons. But, and oftentimes, I don't know, I feel if somebody listened into our conversations whenever we're having that, it's man, y'all are just reminding each other of the most basic truths. And we are.
Jesus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, have you taken that to Jesus? Have you prayed about it? And I know that sounds so hokey, but
and sometimes it's so frustrating to hear that.
It is. But if you're not coming back to it all the time, do you believe it?
That's right.
Do you
well, it's only
believe
frustrating when you're not doing it.
Yeah.
But that's probably our biggest accountability right now is hey, look, are you giving that to the Lord? Because it's a lot.
It's a lot.
It's a lot going on.
Well, and all that stress is going to bleed into.
Oh yeah.
If the Lord doesn't hold everything and it really is all on me and I'm holding all that weight, well, now I'm a victim.
That's right.
And now I can't by extension love you the way that I need to, or
That's
anyone, our children, because I already have too much.
Yeah.
I've been asked too much.
That's right. And we weren't called to carry that weight.
Right.
And we're in Genesis in the life group right now. And were we in 39 yesterday?
Yep.
So Andrew Hinton was teaching, but we just been going through the story of Joseph, and his whole world would just constantly, it was a roller coaster ride.
Yeah.
He would be set in a position of honor, and then something would happen.
Yeah.
And
Totally wrong. Totally wrongly accused.
Totally wrongly accused.
Misunderstood.
Had to sit in the fact that he was being misunderstood. And at the same time, his focus was on Christ the whole time. He would be tempted, and he wouldn't sin.
Yeah.
And he would, and because of his focus and his intentionality.
Yeah.
Going back to intentionality. But
yeah.
That was a really good reminder for me in this season, and for us that's something scripturally that we can hold on to and encourage each other with, is that you just maintain the focus. And we were already having to encourage each other that way, but just another reminder.
It is. It really is. Well, I know we didn't hit necessarily everything, but did you have any other thoughts?
Nope, that's all of them.
All right. Happy anniversary.
Thank you. Happy anniversary. We'll plan a good date.
Yeah, that's right.
So
I thought you had something planned.
Date, a non-kid date. Yeah, I mean, I do.
Right. I
I do.
Yeah.
So tomorrow.
Because you're being intentional,
Today,
right?
yeah.
Because you planned something?
That's right.
Just kidding. He did.
This was our date.
Yeah. LOL. This was not relaxing.
Conversation.
Yeah.
No.
Well, thanks so much, because I know it is nerve-wracking, but you're so good at it, so thanks for coming.
Well, thanks. Well, I know all of your guests say this, but I love you. So.
They actually don't. That might be weird.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I love you too.
Yeah.
Well, thank y'all so much for listening in this week, and we will see you back in season 3 on the Saltworks.
This is my story. This is your story.